was thinking about looking at a little bit of geometry throughout Malcolm X's life, where I found a lot of circle kinds of paths that Malcolm X would take. And he learned some lessons, and then of course I thought about Malcolm X's life, but more specifically, the 2,000 seasons of the life of Malcolm X. But so that I'm brief, so that Brother Hatim can have his say,
oh, man, come on.
I will deal with, look, bro, you talk, that's your strength. That's not mine. I'd rather not. But here we are. We'll look at the geometry, some of the geometric, more specifically the circles that Malcolm X had taken. So we think about how, and Malcolm Little's early life, there were two ideas that came to mind. Several actually, but the idea was that in the one case where Malcolm's mother had a vision, and that was Louise Little, had a vision that her husband, Earl Little, was going to be killed. He was leaving the house angry because he didn't like the meal plan, basically. And as he got down the street, she was at the sink, and she had a vision. And she ran after him, and she cried to him, Earl, come back. And, how we brothers do, we waved her off. Mm-hmm. And of course, next thing you know, she was called upon to, quote unquote, view his body. And of course, the circle there is, you have the vision, and as he's going, and of course, there's some question as to how he died, but some believe it was at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan, the Black Legion, both white supremacy groups, but in that area, it was the Black Legion. They were in Lansing, Michigan at this point. So you have that roundabout where you see the death in your vision, and then you go around to viewing it in at least on this plane, let's say. Then there was the experience where, things got rough after Earl Little had passed. Before then, they were self-sufficient. They had their own garden, could feed themselves, and were doing all right by themselves. But after Earl's transitioning, things, kind of went downhill. And so Louise had to take on jobs. The oldest sister, Hilda, was basically watching over the younger folks. Malcolm was starting to, get a little beside himself or, get into trouble. He was starting to get into trouble. And so you had the vultures of the state through children's services circling, that's the geometry aspect, around the family, waiting for the moment to pounce, to tear the family apart. And so that happens. And then Malcolm is taken out of the Little household Louise Little has a breakdown, so she ends up in the Michigan State institution, mental institution. And Malcolm goes on to stay with some people he would go to hang out with when things got really hard at home. He'd go there to eat, to get something to eat, basically. They knew he was hungry. They knew, what was going on in the house at his home. So, they would feed him. But I'd be remiss if I didn't, there was one thing that caught my attention even before that happened. And it was the idea that the idea of the square actually came into the picture. Y'all remember French toast?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, if your family was like mine and you hit up on hard times, you might do something like French toast, shit on a shingle. Any of y'all remember that?
Yeah.
I don't. Please explain.
So you cook some toast.
Single.
You cook some toast.
SOS.
You might have some hamburger and
SOS.
gravy. And you put the toast on the plate, that's a square, and pour a little gravy and hamburger over it, and that was your meal.
That's a sloppy Joe.
No.
It's
Gravy.
SOS.
Not that red stuff. Gravy. And shoot, I didn't know any different. I was eating. You know what I mean?
Right.
So hell, but those were impressions upon me. As far as how geometry played in his life. I'll fast forward real bit. I'm gonna keep jumping back and forth a little bit because I just want to show, because we're in the area of eating. Let me know when 15 minutes is up, please. When Malcolm X moves to Boston with his sister Ella. Now Ella's well off. She's into real estate. Ella, just a little background. She went through 3 husbands. She's a very strong, independently minded sister. But yeah, so she's doing well. So she's the one who would take family members who are doing, who are having a hard time, bring them to the Boston area and try to get them on their feet. Now there were two other of his siblings in Boston at that time that she had brought. One was a sister named Mary. The other one was a older brother named Earl. And so, but when he gets to living with his sister Ella, the idea that popped out at me was that, they had these round plates, but the significance of it was that it was stacked full of food. And you can imagine coming from as hard a times as having to eat something like anything made with bread, because bread was going to be the cheapest thing to get, and so that's another aspect. Now I'm going back to his childhood. All of this is in his childhood because he was only about maybe 13, 14 when he went to stay with his sister Ella. So we get to where he's staying with this family, and this is at a point where he was getting into trouble, but with this family, he starts to do fairly well. And my memory is failing me right now, but in any event, fast forwarding, he starts getting into trouble with that family, and so he ends up having to go to the home.
Yeah.
Now, again, I don't know what y'all's experience is, but mine was such that my mother passed when we were young, and she was the only one, in charge of her household at the time. There were 8 of us in the house. Oldest brother stayed in Springfield, Illinois. The rest of us went to Marion, Ohio to stay with my grandmother. Now, Grandma had probably, maybe, it's hard for me to say more strict ways because Mom was a disciplinary. She didn't play. Nonetheless, Grandma's ways were a little different from Mom's ways. And as such, a lot of us, we got into trouble. And Grandma would fuss a lot, right? And often what would come out of her mouth is, if y'all don't behave, I'm going to send you to the home, right? And so Malcolm X gets sent to such a home. And in this place, he seems to, at this time have made an about face. So he's doing everything he needs to do. He's getting excellent grades, on the basketball team. His favorite subjects are English and history. So he's doing everything he thinks is wanted of him so that he can get out of the mess that he sees himself in. Well, of course, many of you know the story. He goes to school doing well and everything, and he's asked what he wants to be, and his teacher tells it, he tells the teacher an attorney, and the teacher tells him, that's what niggas aren't supposed to do, do something a nigga is, it's acceptable for a nigga to do. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. So to fast forward, we get to a point where he's out hunting. We get to a point where he's playing around with these white kids, right? And, kids just doing mischief. And one of the mischiefs was to tip over outhouses. Are any of you familiar with that?
Tip over what?
Tipping outhouses.
Oh, okay.
So the idea is that you stand behind the outhouse and push it forward, and it's a mess. So they went to do this at one white guy's house, and he puts the outhouse in front of the cylindrical hole where all the shit goes. Yes. And they sneak up behind the outhouse, and 2 of the white boys fall in. And one of the lessons Malcolm says he learns from that experience is that, white folks always want to take the lead. And so, taking the lead this time basically got him into a bunch of mess. All right? Again, let me know when 15 is up. Now, when Malcolm had gone hunting, one of the things that he was taught was that, when the dog jumps at the rabbit will run a complete circle. And that when it comes back around, that's when we shoot it. So Malcolm got the idea that, I'm going to get a jump on him, right? So he goes to an earlier place in the circle, and so he's shooting all the rabbit, right? so they think, he's a keen shooter and all this, that, and the other, when he just outsmarted them. And of course, his lesson learned from that was, when you find someone doing better than you are, and you're in the same business, you can rest assured that you're doing something that they're not. Then you fast forward to when he's in Boston now. So this is after he's become disgruntled with the school, and You know, he's no longer pleased with being around these white people because he knows they can't be pleased. So he had gone to visit Ella previously and he saw a bunch of black folks and he loved it. So he wrote Ella to come get him, you know, or if he could come stay with her. She came and got him. So now he's in Boston, and some circle ideas that come up in Boston is that she tells him to walk around the town to get to know it, to take the trolley or what's it called, the rail around the town so he could get to know, you know, Boston, because she says a lot of folks come up here and they never get to learn the city because, you know, they're too busy looking for work. And so that was one aspect of it. He got to where he was exploring Harvard. And another one of those circle ideas is that as he's walking around Harvard, you know, he could not imagine that he would return there someday to give a to give a lecture to the Harvard Law School or Law Forum. Let's see, how do we want to bring this to a close? Brother Malcolm said, bear with me, I'm going to try to quote him here. I'm sad to say that the subject I disliked the most was mathematics. I thought about it. The reason was that mathematics left no room for argument. If you make a mistake, that's all there is to it. Now, of course, we can argue with Malcolm on that point, but when or if you've heard Brother Malcolm talk, bandy, if you will, with you know, exchanging in many respects exchanging jabs with people he debated with, in much the same way that Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay exchanged jabs with Howard Cosell. I know this is going back before some of y'all's time, so you know, it's all right.
Howard who?
Howard Cosell. I'm just playing.
And at this point, I would have gone into, and this is where I really wanted to work with the children, and it's Malcolm and the numbers. There's a lot of math lessons in Malcolm and the numbers. Among them are permutations and combinations. Many of you guys who have played the numbers, you know what that's about. Then there's the idea of the percentages. If if you have the banker, the controller, and the runner, you know, the runner gets 10% of whatever he turns into the controller gets 5% of whatever he turns into the banker, and the banker pays off the police, the number, and gets rich off the rest. So that would be a briefing on how we would use Malcolm to teach children or help to improve their math skills, and at the same time learn a little bit about
Running numbers.
Brother Malcolm. Yeah. But, you know, when you think about Ujamaa, the numbers generated such money
Yes, it did.
where it could employ a city of folks.
Mm-hmm.
A city of folks like us.
Mm-hmm.
And we could live well.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they got taken over by the Italians. And life goes on. But anyway, so I will conclude at that point and let my brother and his randomness take over.
All right. Cause I'm
I'm gonna say no. Thank you, Kwame.
Thank
I
you.
learned something. Yeah.
talk to you about the numbers. Now the state took it.
Said something about Brother Malcolm when he left the Nation of Islam that Warith Muhammad talked to Malcolm, told him to go to Mecca, and he found out, and when he went to Mecca, he found out what the teaching was, Elijah Muhammad was teaching, it wouldn't have nothing to do with.
We haven't got there yet.
Huh?
I thought were just responding to what Brother Kwame's presentation was. Thank you, Brother Robert. I interjected. I'm sorry. I thought what was interesting about that is that I did the K-roll syrup and the toast, and I did the butter on the toast, and the stove was a pot-belly stove where you had to put wood or coal in it. So looking at it from that mathematical point of view, and then from Malcolm's interaction with the mathematics and all of that, thank you. That was good looking at it from that perspective.
And and there, of course, there was a lot more, but like
Yeah.
I said,
We'll have children.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't want to talk about any white girls today, so I don't want to talk about the circles he ran in for all that.
That's geometry too. All right, so I need to turn on. Okay. Just push your chair up there. Push your chair up there. Go ahead, do that.
Or either just make Kwame get up out of that chair.
Nah, Kwame cool. Just move this.
Just move to the chair beside you.
All right. So, because I gotta preface this. I don't know that much about Malcolm. Really?
But you do.
But I do.
Gotcha.
Malcolm was inspiring, but I was never inspired enough to really even pick up a book about him. The only book that I read about Malcolm is the one that is highly contested by Manny Martin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, we got you.
Right. But the one thing that I am familiar with in Malcolm, and like when me and Kwame spoke, because it's like we was talking about this, I said, bro, I'm going to stick to what I know. The hero's journey, rites of passage. And one of the things that bothers me about Malcolm's life, because like we're calling the Malcolm X Festival, the Malcolm X Revolutionary Leader Festival, because Malcolm is just a representation of revolutionary leadership. And one of the things we have to eliminate in our community is the randomness of Malcolm's. Malcolm was a beautiful thing, but he was random.
Remember the randomness of the creation.
The randomness of the creation of Malcolm is bad for us as a people. And what do I mean? If we look at Malcolm's life and we go through all the stuff that Kwame talked about, Malcolm was a random event that culminated into what we know. Malcolm was family was basically destroyed by an outside enemy. Malcolm was stopped in his education, not mainly by people just putting up their hands, but by people placing limits on him from the outside of him. Malcolm was a child of the street after a while and eventually ended up in prison, to where he ran into an organization that gave him the motivation to clean himself up. All of these are random events. And one of the things that our ancestors have laid out for us is a way in which we can purposefully, using Nia, create Malcolms. And the thing that we need to reflect on when we look at Malcolm's life, and we look at the life of a Marcus Garvey, who was a random event, and we look at Booker T. Washington, which was a random event, a lucky event for us, when in fact the tools for creating Malcolm X is supposed to be the normal. Marcus Garvey is supposed to be the normal. Booker T. Washington is supposed to be the normal, not the random events. Because the system that our ancestors laid in place made sure that we was able to create somebody that was for the people. Now, we go back and we look at Malcolm X, and we big up Malcolm X, and some of us like, because when I walked in, one of the arguments is one that I used to have with people. Why y'all call him Malcolm X? It need to be El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. But it wasn't El Hajj Malik Shabazz that actually sparked a lot of people into the movement. It was the Malcolm X. And the Malcolm X that was formed, or the Malcolm that was formed and became the one that carried the X, was an individual that ran into an elder by the name of Elijah Muhammad. Yeah. And a lot of people want to jump right over the fact that what Malcolm X, or what formed Malcolm X, was a process, was a purposeful process that he ran into in his 30s. What was it, late 20s, early 30s?
Yeah.
And nobody really wants to talk about what the Nation of Islam is. What the Nation of Islam is a rites of passage. It was basically a rites of passage program.
Yeah.
They pulled him in. They taught him what a man was. They taught him what a man's responsibility was. They taught him what a man was supposed to do in the nation, and what a man, and how a man and a woman was supposed to interact.
In this community.
Now, my only question is, how much more powerful would that brother have been if he had been possibly brought up in a system like that? A system that was outside, in a sense, he was able to be protected from those outside forces. So when we look at this whole randomness piece, because we look and we see Malcolm was formed in spite of the enemy's attacks. And what we have to start being able to do is start nurturing our young people and ourselves in a way where we no longer have to wait for that random individual to pop out, that lucky individual to squeeze through and make it. And we have to be honest about some of the institutions that are used for this, because school, whether we want to not acknowledge it or not, is a rites of passage process.
Yeah.
Sports programs are rites of passage processes. And many of our jobs were rites of passage processes. But the only issue that we have to look at and we have to face are, what are they training us for? What is the process there for? The school system. What is the purpose of the school system? What is it developing people for? Is it developing them for the best of their people, or is it developing them for the best of somebody else and put them in service of other people? One of the things that I notice about Malcolm is that without any college, Malcolm could stun those who had went to some of the best universities in the United States of America. From learning from a dude who set up a system that was in the third grade. Mm-hmm. Now, like I said, I can't help but to think, what would happen if we was to actually look at what we have and really focused it on developing, making Malcolm X the normal. Really setting up a process for our young people to come in and to be groomed and be shaped, not randomly, but on purpose. And because that has been my mission for a long time, because I see these accidents popping up, and I don't want to call Malcolm, because I have no other word for Malcolm and his rise, but it was a random occurrence that would make an individual that don't study think that there can only be one, or there's just this one, and I need to wait for God to bless me. Because in many instances with us waiting on random events, it's sort of like us turning over our destiny and saying, if it's God's will.
Jesus gonna help.
You know what I'm saying? I'm waiting for Jesus to come back, or I'm waiting for the next Malcolm, rather than becoming that Malcolm X. Now, when we look at Malcolm's life, like I said, we could look we could trace his process. And there's several points that mocks the hero's journey when he got a call from the streets, because in rites of passage, there's three major parts that we talk about, but there's a fourth one that oftentimes is overlooked. We learn about separation, initiation, reintroduction. Now, but there is something that happens before all that, and it's the call. Malcolm X received a call to the streets, and he was separated and initiated into the streets, and he learned the thing about the numbers. He learned about running, drinking. He learned about all those things out there. He was initiated into that life and reintroduced as, what was it? Boston Red. What was it? Boston Red? What was it called?
Detroit Red.
Detroit Red.
Detroit Red.
Detroit Red.
Did he ever live in Detroit?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just checking. I'm just like,
His brother Will lived in Detroit. But nobody in Boston knew where Lansing was.
yeah, oh, that's true. Okay.
You had to give them a city they recognized.
Right.
Your comments right now are right on point, extremely on point. The process before, but the process is recognized by someone.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And they are the ones who develop, and they're never, that's what I was talking to Brother Robert, but I don't want to interrupt you, but go ahead. So it's right on point. About the three, before the three, there is
right.
that one. That's right.
That call
that's
now.
Right on point.
This is what's crazy about the call. Unfortunately, the only place in our community where that call and that process is actually recognized is on the street level.
What do they say about that? Many are called,
but few are chosen.
No, that's what I want to say. There are those who are there watching the call, and they do choose.
They choose,
and then they put you. Okay,
they put you through.
You're right. You're right on it.
And unfortunately, the way the street, because I'm old enough to remember. For example, going back to the street, there used to be rules. I'm old enough to remember that.
Is the street a university?
The street is a university.
Thank you.
The street is, as a matter of fact, you had to be accepted back in the day. You had to be accepted into that life.
That's right.
They understand what they are for, and they initiate people. They select people. Right. They give them the call, and they allow them in. Because there was a time where they would find young boys in the street with a pocket full of money, dead. That was a signal to everybody else that was involved, the one to be involved with the street life. We don't care about the money. This is not about the money. A rule was broken. There's a consequence. In the streets, there's a straight consequence for your actions and whatever. So that was really the only place where he could actually get an initiation that would actually, in a sense, benefit him. It would become a minus in some senses to the community that he belonged to. And what we have to be able to combat is the fact that we have nothing on the positive road that we can actually give our young people that would inspire them to be as dedicated, because he was very dedicated to their street life. Very dedicated to that.
And it was dedicated to him.
And it was dedicated, well, the street don't love nobody.
That sounds like a song, bro.
The street don't, hey, listen.
It was.
The streets don't love nobody, especially if you violate.
That's the dedication.
Right, that's the dedication.
That's the dedication.
And you have to understand that.
You got to understand that.
And he was taught that, and he came through that process. But then he received another call. And that call was prison time. Now, that was a whole initiation into a whole nother system. The prison system. We go into that because go ahead.
Real quickly, before, the idea of being accepted. Now, there was this place called, now, Tony, you probably know it, Smalls. Smalls Paradise.
Right, on 35th.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there was this brother there, West Indian. Now, these were, well-to-do black folks.
Oh, yeah.
But they weren't pretentious, right? And there's this West Indian brother who called Malcolm over to him, and he gave him a packet. And that packet was a new suit. And that's telling Malcolm, that you've been accepted.
That was his reintroduction. Because they had a certain flair, a certain style, and you couldn't go outside that code. You understand what I'm saying? So that was a system.
You can't be showy.
You can't be showy because you bring attention on this thing of ours. Right? Now, what happens is when you break those rules, there are consequences. There's a strict code, even with some of the street boys today. And the reason the streets are the way they are right now is that code has dropped, because there was a point in time where you couldn't rob the grandma in the neighborhood's house.
That's right.
Because everybody knew they knew who to go to find that. And some of us done experienced that. Back in the day, where somebody that was the victim of a crime was able to know who to go talk to in order to get, I had your shit back by 12 noon.
Right.
As a matter of fact, there's a story that when Muhammad Ali was in Chicago, I think he had a purple Rolls Royce. He parked the purple Rolls Royce somewhere. And he came out and it was gone.
The fools wouldn't.
And he was on the radio that day and he said, man, yeah, somebody stole my purple Rolls Royce. And he said he walked out, the story is he walked out to the back of the building and his Rolls Royce was sitting out there clean with a note on the seat saying, champ, we didn't know this was yours.
Yeah.
Because the car went out from the OGs. Because there were certain rules. And there was certain, but now it's just running amok.
What was the story? You're right on point. What was the one with the one Rosa Parks when them fools went into her house and
that wasn't too long ago.
yeah, when they went into her house and they had no idea.
They had no idea
who Rosa Parks
was. Right.
They went and got them fools and
right.
so
there's still
your point is on point.
right. There's still a semblance of that order.
And
right?
Your question is, and I'm not. Is that still in place today? That I thought was one of the questions you asked.
Not as severely as back then, because one of the things we have to recognize is that this is one of the systems that they had to break down, because the first attacks on the system, because as Kwame pointed out, there were a segment of those individuals that were actually involved in nation building.
Oh, yeah. Because
they controlled the numbers. Numbers, I mean, hell, if we look at the history of black folks in numbers, we go all the way back to, I think it was Denmark Vesey who won. Think about it. This blows my mind. Denmark Vesey brought his freedom from the lottery. Now, this is the question. If black folks was in slavery, how in the hell was black people able to do a lottery?
That's why they revoked that 40 acres in the mule.
Think about that. Where was they keeping it? You know what I'm saying? Black folk, he won enough money to buy himself. Look, I mean, so the lottery has been a long-standing tradition. And in lottery, nobody really get hurt. And there's a lot of money in this. So the Italians come in, the Irish try to come in, and eventually the state take the numbers. And now we see signs all over where they legalize this thing that was ours. A staple in our community that was able to provide in every city, that everywhere we come from, New York, in Harlem, in Louisiana, up in where you from, in Akron. Matter of fact, most of us probably go to our hometown and probably go to the barbershop that we know numbers was being ran out of, or the old record store where we know, or the old candy store where we know numbers used to be ran out of, and it might be run down now, but we know back in the day it employed possibly hundreds of people. So you had that part of it, but then of course you always had the thieves and the people on the other side. So we did have people involved in nation building activities, right?
Yeah, one of our own elders was a participant.
Hey, we being recorded.
That's what I said. One of our own, look, it ain't no secret among us, but you know, I just said one of our elders, you know.
And that was part of that was us snatching, because we understood, as you said, as above, so below. Things run above, or in the above world, or the world that you can see everything in one way, but below it runs exactly the same. Somebody got to control the underworld, always. And that's one of the things that in our randomness we kind of forgot. We kind of think that God is going to handle everything. No, shit, we need somebody to control hell as well as somebody to control heaven. Now, going back to Malcolm. Malcolm went through that process. He had another call from the system. and he eventually went into jail. But that was derailed because of the random event of him running into a brother that was studying under Elijah Muhammad, in which he was able to be brought into a system that was able to use his talents to not only help himself, but to also help his nation. And the only thing that I'm saying, as a people, we need to stop these random events from being random. This need to be the norm. And especially far as us in Columbus, because we're Nation of Islam is family, but we're not Nation of Islam. Right. Do we have the lessons that an individual can take that can transform their lives and themselves into something that is useful for our community? There is I can't remember the white boy's name.
What do you do?
But there was, I'm reading, I just got done reading a book, because I read this book once a year along with seeing other movies. I try to do it once a year. It's called Natural Born Hero. And the book is a story with facts, and it's about World War II and the island of Crete, and how they fucked up the Germans' overall plan when they went to Russia. And a lot of people are not really associated with the whole idea that Germany could not move forward in Russia in the way that they wanted to, because when they rode into Greece, they was able to take out Greece as an island in like 7 days. But when they came to Crete, they ran into a whole different type of people that they wasn't expecting, that held them back. Well, anyway, this dude was doing research, and he found out about this dude that was either prior to World War One or right after World War One. The guy was on a ship, and he was close to an island, and a volcano erupted. When the volcano erupted, he started noticing that the people couldn't get away because they was out of shape. They couldn't swim 10 feet. They couldn't climb a wall. They couldn't climb a tree. The volcano is erupted, and the people are not able to help themselves. So he came up with this physical fitness piece where he went back and he studied, quote unquote, traditional societies. Traditional societies, and y'all know what that means. He went and studied us and how we naturally stay in shape. Well, anyway, the code that he came up was being useful. The highest thing that an individual could be is to be useful. And one of the things that the Nation of Islam did for Malcolm was they took Malcolm and they made him useful, not just for the street, not just for the system, but for us. But it was a random event that made that happen. And we have the tools right now in hand to either increase us running randomly into people that are able and looking for something like that right now, rather than relying on just luck and God. That's all I wanted to say. That's all I wanted to say. And then also just going back, and I just want to stress, if you look at the Nation of Islam piece, they basically doing the same thing that we're doing. It's just, we just not out as out front with it. We're not building on it in the same manner, which we actually could, because every last one of these seats, and it should be standing room only in here, but no.
A quick comment.
Oh, okay.
You will notice that both Hatem and I came after Malcolm X transition. And it was going to be my idea to have Elder Tony even up here with us, because he lived right there in Harlem, who could give, another insight on whatever Brother Hatem or I was saying. But we'll get that during Divine Conversation.
I want to say thank you.
Well, I'll make it
And-
short,
Okay.
if that's okay.
But I'm going to say
Yeah,
something after that.
Yeah, boy.
After you make it short. I
Okay.
have something. I have a bunch of notes.
I thought that what both of y'all were saying was absolutely true. The fact that being chosen by the group, I think that we need to take a look at that it's not random. It seems random, but because my friends and all of those on the stage, there was literally lots of Malcolms to choose from. And that's what I was explaining to Brother Robert here earlier. Did he ever see him speak on the corner of 125th Street in front of the Teresa Hotel? Did he see him speak across the street in front of the bookstore and stuff? So we will explore that, like we were saying at Divine Conversation. How and why are that one chosen, and then how were they developed? That's extreme, because from what I understand, this goes all the way back before Marcus Garvey and Malcolm's parents. As we come up, who does that understanding that can say, yeah, we can work with this one, and so that I think both yours presentations was just really outstanding. So thank you. I'd like to really talk about that at the Divine Conversation.
Did you ever know Charles Kenyatta? He used to speak right there at the hotel in front of a restaurant on 125th Street.
Which
His name was
Kenyatta?
Charles Kenyatta.
Yeah, Mama Lona was.
Oh,
Thank you,
was-
Brother Robert.
Again, I echo what Elder Tony said. I really like your perspectives, both of your perspectives on Malcolm. It gave me a different way of looking at him. And I can't wait for Divine Conversation, because questions I wrote: what is an example of a purposeful event? You were talking about his was random. Can we make it less random and more purposeful? What are examples of that? Because I think there are purposeful events that go on out there in choosing people. But what's the outcome?
That's the piece.
Because there are purposeful events
Oh,
that
yeah.
people
That's
are
it.
chosen, developed for certain things. But the outcomes may not be what we need at the time, or it may be. And the call, you said one place where the call was in the streets. I think a purposeful calling event happens all the time in Christianity. That call is there. And so I thought about that. I thought about being useful. I thought that was really something we can talk about. And just yesterday, Elder Oropianki and I was having a discussion about Elder Renee, and sorry I don't know Renee's last name. Triggs, right. About Elder Renee and Elder J. And how they transform their lives. Because he was telling me, Elder Renee has his the ceremony coming up for him getting his GED. Oropianki did not know that Elder J, he dropped out of high school the same way. Decided he had to go to Vietnam. Daddy thought he was the dumbest thing. You my smartest son and you doing something stupid. But he did. Then he came out. He said, well, now I'm ready to go to college. People said, well, you don't have a high school diploma. He said, what do you mean? What do I need that for college? So went back. He said, well, what do I have to do? Take the test. He took the test, passed the test. Now can I go? That kind of thing. So I think if we look, we can find those transformations. What we don't do is put them out there.
Could you repeat that again?
I said we can find those transformations where people have gone through these things and that allowed them to transform their lives and really transform their lives as opposed to the path they were going to be on. But we don't put them out there. We don't talk about them. We don't echo them. So I look forward to Divine Conversation so we can talk about some of these things. Yeah. So I think it's good. I like the perspective you guys brought on Malcolm. You're right.
Well,
Other people need to hear this stuff.
Well, you know, in some of what I was talking about, I hope you noticed I was employing Brother Wakesa's,
Yeah.
what's that called, the Universal Orphan?
Yes.
Or something
Yes.
like that.
The universal
You know,
order.
so,
Yes.
you know, I keep referring to his family members because something I didn't mention, but when Malcolm, you know, first talked about his brother Wilfred, his older brother Wilfred, Wilfred was an avid reader. Avid reader. He attended, what was it, school down the street here, not Central State, but the one across the street.
Wilberforce.
Yeah, Wilberforce. You know, he attended Wilberforce, and even at some point was teaching, you know, at the college level. And so, you know, he had
Family.
you know, yeah, he had family, but Wilfred had the brains, but still, he wasn't chosen.
Thank you. And that's what I was, yeah, we're talking
So yeah.
divide over there. And once you're chosen, it's then being controlled. Those two things. Once you're chosen, then how do I control you
Yep.
over that period of time? Because in the beginning, everything is like, oh, wow, boom, and they let you, and then they want to steer you. Because back on the block, most of the talk was we want to go to here. They would announce that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was going to speak at the mosque, right? And then folks would go like, well, who else is there? And then they said, well, Malcolm is going to be. And so what happened is you had that shift that most folks were wanting to hear.
Malcolm.
So you did not control. I'll tell you, it's going to be interesting in 2 weeks, well. So thank you very much,
see,
both
It'll
of
be
you.
good
What you
conversation.
referred to,
And-
Mother
and-
Tony, and you appreciate this, is there's a chapter in his autobiography called Icarus.
Yeah.
You remember?
Yeah. Woo.
Saying,
And-
for
and
those
we
who
just-
didn't know,
We just did Wilberforce's graduation again. They asked us back because of the me and Yende and my wife, the way because of and the knowledge of being told, like we were talking about, and how it's directed, and what do they do for the black consciousness, like you were speaking, and all that kind of stuff. It's like Mama Alona was saying here, we have to recognize that a lot of our folks who got us on the, is at Wilberforce. I mean, one of the powerful sisters from Hidden Figures was at Wilberforce.
Okay.
And I asked the girls or the sisters that were standing out there, I said, what's the name of the sister that was at Wilberforce? And they had no idea. And one of the doctoral professors was standing there. So they went to get out their phones. I said, no. Right here is the true history. He can tell you. And he went, yes, they know. And so like y'all was saying, we embracing each other with the knowledge, the ones who was actually living on the block with that stuff. So you guys, this was really exciting. I think you should really.
Yeah.
You see, Mama Lona was over there chomping at the bit. I thought she was going to close us out. That's why I said, I told the truth, like those questions, so I apologize. I thought you was going to okay, let's form the circle and sing the song.
No, but we can.
Okay, I like it. And Mama Lona, thank you very much for being, and I hope this is taken in the spirit of goodness, as the sister in the room that's been represent.
Represent.
What'd she say?
Represent.
The female power.
The sisters.
Okay.
Yeah.
feminine,
Yeah, thank you.
the feminine measure.
Feminine. She's bringing around the bowl up, Brother Kwame.
Yes.
She's bringing around the bowl right now.
We gonna
And I think
take
Brother
up
Cliff
our
is just, we don't need no music, we're just gonna bring it around, right?
Yeah.
What we getting ready to do right now?
Bring
We're
the
gonna
bowl
do our
around, the money
offering.
bowl.
Okay, I'll get my offering when I get back. Baba Tony, could you get me to the restroom, please?
Okay.
You sure? I can take you.
Yeah, I'm putting the money, I actually got money here. Oh, I'm gonna give Brother Kwame some money for dues when I come back. when he come back.
Thank you.
Wait a minute.
What?
Let me give you another $1 here. Come on. Oh, where's she going?
Oh. Thank you.
I'm gonna give you.
$2
There.
more.
I take those. I'll give you 5, Mama.
Thank you. You don't take those and give
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Yeah, I was trying to tell me how to ride boy, and like they were talking. I mean, being selected. And guess what? Guess what? Black folks weren't the only ones selected.
I had that point.
Oh no, they weren't the only ones selected. The Italians, the Jews, all others were selected you because these were people like my uncle who had the gifts of what they call the gift of gab.
Oh, yeah, I heard
Yeah,
you get the girl.
when you hear people who can really talk,
Who can really tell you, I mean, then you get them to sell your team and your
yeah.
stuff.
See, that is one thing, and maybe he'll be that person.
Huh?
That, and this is
The important part would steer them,
I heard.
Yeah.
steer them away from their
Okay.
particular
That's what happened.
gifts.
You and I talking right now. Let's talk.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Because even the idea, I look back at when I got to school.
I know you're looking at me like that, so
Oh,
we'll
talk.
the same thing that happened
Pimp,
between Malcolm
drug
and
addict,
Abu Muhammad. Okay?
works in prison.
Okay? So remember when I said
Because only after-
you reach a point that, okay, now how do I control this?
Yes, because you do.
Brothers who.
And that's what happened.
Who actually,
Because
they
you
were, I'm
really-
sure they were.
And that's what happened.
You really do have to. be.
Well, see, there goes the, see, there it goes.
And the soul
But
that
you
you
don't-
We don't, that's what I'm saying, and that's what the break
But
comes.
you
I got
don't
it, I'm in
know.
11th grade.
And you see,
I
this is, you
had-
might, who
pretty
would,
good mathematics, so
might say spooky stuff.
Uh,
Mike, what's his name? He used to say
Have my
stuff.
dark glasses out there,
What's
partied
his
all the
name?
time. But
Angelique.
they didn't understand.
Yeah.
Most of
Okay.
the brothers in my neighborhood were just like me, partying all the
So
time.
often, we don't know who's really controlling. And all
Up
the
until
control
low grade,
might
yeah,
not be
but then a lot
on
of
what
us,
you see.
did the mistake that my father told me, I
See,
said not to,
the one
I this message.
who went on to do my time.
Yeah.
Who used to be with us.
Nice,
Yeah.
What's
Which one? Which
The
one?
one from here.
In that,
But it was
time.
Come on from here.
Well, no, the
Haru?
one really, yes, Brother Haru.
Haru, he was a big one.
Huh?
Haru, you mean Haru?
Yeah.
Or do you mean the other guy that died?
In our time,
Who?
The one that died?
dishwasher,
Oh, the one that died.
a pumping,
Oh.
that was it. And
So
they basically,
So that's what-
but that
that's
was there
what-
to pay
so
them
they
to
did.
take. Right.
All three of them.
Because They just,
all
cause
that.
where you were at, you weren't supposed to
That's
be
what
there.
I'm saying to you, and
But
they had that
bars,
thing,
clubs
and
like
people
that,
followed.
they pay you to take your dishwasher.
And so I think you get your
Yes,
finger
that's
on the
it.
pulse. What I'm saying, okay, with him and the others, like, I mean, each of them are different, but they're dog folks who, so what do we, okay, so that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it, that's the key. And somehow we don't understand the key.
Sister Luna,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to.
Get moving.
Speed my process up, cause I gotta.
We're gonna, I'm holding the chair.
Myself out of here.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you for doing as you did.
Where's my
So-
bag?